He had never once told her she was beautiful, not in English, not in Korean, not in any of the 7 languages that lived in her bones like a second skeleton, not once in 3 weeks and 4 days of working side by side in boardrooms and negotiation rooms and quiet Korean restaurants where the lanterns breathed warm light over cold tea and careful words. He had never said it, but he had learned exactly how she took her coffee. And somehow, in the specific world of Seo Joon-ho, where nothing was accidental and everything meant precisely what it was intended to mean, that felt like more. Nadia Ease was sitting at her kitchen table in southwest Atlanta at 6 in the morning with a worn card between her fingers and a truth she had been carrying for 3 weeks sitting in the center of her chest like a small, persistent, completely inconvenient fire. The card was cream-colored, soft at the edges from handling. The fold beginning to separate the way things do when someone has opened and closed them too many times to count. On the card, 4 words. Korean. In handwriting so precise and deliberate, it looked like every character had been considered before it was committed to paper. She knew what they said. She had known from the moment she read them standing under a magnolia tree on a cracked Atlanta sidewalk with a saxophone playing somewhere close and the whole city moving around her completely unbothered. 7 languages lived in her and Korean lived close enough to the edges that those 4 words had landed in her chest before her brain finished processing them. She knew. She just was not ready yet for what knowing required her to do next. She put the card in her pocket. She always put it in her pocket. Not her bag. Her pocket. The difference mattered. Bags get set down. Pockets stay with you. And that, right there, is where this story picks up. Not with danger, not with a contract or a corrupt negotiation, or a room full of people performing honesty they do not possess. With a woman and 4 untranslated words, and the particular ache of someone who has been shown, quietly and consistently, and without any announcement, that she matters to a man who has never once said so out loud. Now listen, if you watched part 1 and you have spent the last few days in the comments trying to decode what he wrote on that card, stay with me, because by the end of this video, you are going to know exactly what those 4 words mean, and I promise you, everything you thought you understood about Seo Joon-ho is going to rearrange itself the moment you hear them. Drop a comment right now. What do you think he wrote? Best answer gets pinned. Subscribe if you haven't already. Because what happens next is the kind of story that stays with you. Now, back to Atlanta. 3 weeks and 4 days. That was how long Nadia had been working for Joon-ho. In that time, she had translated 6 negotiations, reviewed 14 contracts and sat in rooms with some of the most powerful and dangerous men in Atlanta's business world and rendered every word faithfully, precisely, without agenda. She had also tried 4 times to give something back to a man who had a quiet and deeply held and entirely maddening personal policy against receiving anything from her. Every single time, he redirected it, got there first, gave her something instead. The first time she brought food, not elaborate, just good. Jollof rice and fried plantain from a Nigerian restaurant in Decatur that her mother had taken her to as a child every time something worth celebrating happened. She set it on the table beside his papers without a word, treating it as casually as he treated her morning coffee. A simple thing, an honest thing. He did not touch it during the entire 3-hour session. Afterward it was gone, and Kwon was looking at the wall with an expression of such deliberate neutrality that it functioned as a full confession. The next session her coffee was waiting as always. Beside it, the best Korean street food Doraville had to offer. Warm. Perfect. No note. No explanation. Just Joon-ho across the room reviewing documents as though he had not just quietly and efficiently turned her entire gesture back around and aimed it at her. She had stared at that food for a very long time. The second time she decided to learn Korean. Properly. Not the conversational edges she already carried, but real structured study. Flashcards in her apartment at night, audio lessons on the Marta. a battered textbook from a Doraville bookshop that she thought she had been discreet about keeping in her bag. She had not been discreet. Kwon noticed on day 2, which meant Junho knew by day 3. She had practiced for a week, planned to walk into their next session and greet him in his language, reaching toward him the same way he had reached toward her with those 2 Igbo words that had stopped her heart completely the first time he said them. She had practiced the pronunciation until it felt almost natural in her mouth. The morning she planned to do it, she arrived and found a package on the table beside her coffee. The most comprehensive Korean language course available. Professional grade. The kind used by diplomatic translators. With a note in his handwriting. 2 words. English. Teach yourself. She read it twice. Her jaw tightened. Somewhere in the building, Kwon was being professionally silent in a way that was somehow louder than laughter. He had known. He got there first. He gave her the tools and quietly removed himself from the equation, rather than let her use him as the destination. She opened the course. She was going to learn this language if it took her the rest of her life. Not for him, for herself. Because Nadia Adayez had never once in her life been told she could not do something and responded by doing anything other than exactly that thing. But sitting on the martyr that morning with the card warm in her pocket and the city sliding past grey windows, she allowed herself, just for a moment, to feel the full weight of what he was doing. He would not receive anything from her, but he would give back immediately every time she tried. Coffee when she brought food, language tools when she tried to speak his language. Always something, never nothing, just never himself. Why? She had been turning that question over for 3 weeks and 4 days, and she was not yet sure she had the right answer. But she was beginning to suspect that the answer, when she finally found it, was going to be the most heartbreaking and most beautiful thing she had ever translated. Her phone buzzed. Kwon, just an address and a time. But underneath, 3 words she had never received from Kwon in all the weeks of working together. Dress warmly today. She stared at her screen, looked out the window at an Atlanta sky, the heavy particular grey of a city that has decided to do something significant and has not yet announced what. She typed back, "Why?" No response. Of course not. She changed her blazer for a coat. The address was not a boardroom, not a high-rise, not any of the clean corporate spaces Kwon usually sent her to. It was a parking structure in Old Fourth Ward, which made no sense at all until she arrived and found not a meeting room but a black Genesis idling at the ground floor with Kwon in the driver's seat and Junho in the back, and absolutely zero explanation offered by either of them. She got in. The door closed, and she noticed, the way she always noticed everything about him now, that the moment she was in the car, something in his posture shifted. Not visibly, not in any way anyone else would catch, just a degree of settling. Like a room adjusting to the arrival of the person it had been waiting for, she noticed. She filed it. She added it to the growing collection of things about Seo Junho that she was keeping in the same pocket as that card. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Mr. Seo," Kwon said from the front, "would like to show you something." She looked at Junho. He was looking out the window. Long, straight black hair. Charcoal coat. The particular stillness that was simply his natural weather. "Show me what?" she said. He turned and looked at her then. Dark eyes, completely direct, in the way they always were. No performance, no deflection, just the full weight of his attention, landing on her face like it always did. Like she was the most important thing in whatever room she happened to be in. "Atlanta," he said simply, "the parts of it that are true." And outside the Genesis, the city opened up around them, layered and complicated and full of stories nobody had translated yet. As Nadia sat beside a man who had written 4 words on a card she carried in her pocket every day and pressed her lips together against a smile she was not yet ready to give him. Not yet, but soon. He took her to a part of Atlanta that does not exist on any tourist map. Not the Buckhead high-rises where money performed itself loudly every evening. Not the gleaming midtown corridors where deals got made in glass buildings that caught the light and threw it back at you like a warning. Not the polished surface of the city that Nadia had been moving through invisibly for 3 years, carrying other people's expensive plates and translating other people's important words. He took her to the part of Atlanta that was simply itself. They drove through sweet Auburn first. The Genesis moving slowly, unhurried, Kwon navigating the morning streets with the ease of someone who has learned a city not as a map, but as a living thing. Junho said nothing for a long time, just looked out the window. And because he was looking, Nadia looked too. Really looked. The way you look at something when someone you trust has told you it is worth seeing. And it was. The old brick buildings, the painted murals rising 4 stories against grey morning sky, colours so saturated they seemed to generate their own light, even on a day like this. The churches with their worn steps, and their history written into the stone. The small businesses with hand-painted signs in windows, open despite the hour, the smell of something good cooking drifting out onto the sidewalk and mixing with cold Georgia air. My father used to say, Junho said quietly, still looking out the window, that you cannot understand a city from its center. You have to find the places it goes when nobody is watching. Nadia looked at him. He almost never spoke about his father. He almost never spoke about anything personal. In 3 weeks and 4 days, she could count on one hand the number of times he had offered something of himself unprompted. She did not say anything. She had learned, was still learning, that with Junho, silence was not emptiness. It was an invitation. You stayed in it and waited. And sometimes he kept going and sometimes he didn't. And both meant something. He kept going. He brought me to Seoul like this when I was young, before, a pause brief and carefully contained, before things became complicated. He would drive and I would look. He said the city would teach me everything I needed to know about people if I paid attention to what they built when they thought no one cared. Nadia looked back out the window. A woman was opening the shutters of a flower shop on the corner, moving with the particular unhurried rhythm of someone who has done this exact thing 10,000 mornings and found it sufficient every time. 2 old men sat on chairs outside a barber shop that was not yet open, drinking coffee from paper cups and conducting what was clearly a deeply important conversation about something neither of them would remember by afternoon. What did the city teach you? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. That people build beauty in places where nobody told them they were allowed to, he said. And that is the only beauty worth anything. She felt that land somewhere specific inside her chest. She did not look at him. She looked at the flower shop woman now arranging a bucket of sunflowers on the sidewalk in the grey morning light, yellow so bright it was almost aggressive. That sounds like something my father used to say, she said quietly. Tell me. It was not a request exactly, not a command either, just an opening. The same kind of silence as invitation she was learning to recognize. She took it. He was a diplomat, she said. We moved a lot. Different countries, different languages, different cities. And every time we arrived somewhere new, he would take me out the first morning, before the meetings, before the schedule, before any of it. And we would just walk, for hours. He said you had to introduce yourself to a place before you asked anything of it. He sounds like someone who understood things, Junho said. He was, she said. Past tense. Quiet and clean. She did not elaborate and he did not push. That was another thing about him. He understood the shape of what people were not saying, and he never reached into it uninvited. The Genesis turned and suddenly they were somewhere completely different. A stretch of the Beltline she had never walked. Not the busy weekend sections full of joggers and market stalls, but a quieter branch, lined with winter bare trees and more murals. The path empty this early except for a single cyclist moving through the grey distance ahead of them. Walk with me, Junho said. It was the first time in 3 weeks and 4 days that he had suggested anything that was not professional, not a negotiation, not a contract review, not a meeting of any kind, just walk with me. Kwon stopped the car, Junho got out, Nadia got out, and they walked, side by side on the Beltline path with Atlanta quiet around them and the cold Georgia morning sitting on their shoulders like something companionable. And it was the most natural thing that had happened between them since the night she picked up that phone on a Buckhead sidewalk and heard his voice for the first time saying, "Are you hurt?" She thought about saying something. She had approximately 40 things she wanted to say. She said none of them. She just walked beside him and let the city do what it always did, hold everything without comment. They walked for 20 minutes before he spoke again. "The coffee," he said. She glanced at him. "What about it?" "You never told me how you take it." "No," she agreed. "I didn't." A pause, their footsteps quiet on the path. Somewhere in the bare trees above them, a bird was conducting a one-sided argument with the morning. "I watched," he said simply. "The first week. Every time there was coffee in the room, I watched what you did with it." She kept her eyes forward. Her heart was doing something she had stopped pretending was professional. "That's a lot of attention," she said carefully, "for a translator." "Yes," he said, and left it exactly there. Not an explanation, not a deflection, just an agreement that sat between them on the Beltline path and meant everything it meant, and he knew it, and she knew it, and neither of them was going to say so yet. She pulled her coat tighter against the cold. "Junho." "Yes." "Why did you bring me here today?" "The real reason." He stopped walking. She stopped a half step after him and turned to face him. He was looking at her with that expression, the complete unguarded focus that he gave her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, except she was always paying attention, and he had to know that by now. "Because?" he said slowly.
"Because you have spent 3 weeks giving me the best of your
professional self. And it is extraordinary." A pause. "But I have been wondering." He stopped, started again.
I have been wanting to know the rest.
The Beltline stretched quiet and empty in both directions. The city breathed around them. A thin, cold wind moved through the bare trees and lifted a strand of her hair across her cheek, and he watched it happen with an expression so unguarded it nearly undid her entirely. "The rest of what?" she said softly. "The rest of you," he said. "The parts that exist outside of negotiations and contracts and rooms where everything has to mean something useful." She looked at him for a long time, the card in her pocket. 4 untranslated words pressing warm against her hip. "That's," she started. Her phone rang. Not Kwon. The screen said, "Emory University Hospital." Everything else stopped. She answered before the second ring finished. "This is Nadia Ease. Miss Ease. This is Dr. Mensa at Emory. I'm calling about your mother, Dorothy." A pause that lasted approximately 1 full heartbeat too long. "She's fine. I want to say that first. She's absolutely fine. But she's asking for you. Specifically and repeatedly, and with what I can only describe as considerable determination." Nadia exhaled. The cold Atlanta morning rushed back in around her. The Beltline, the bare trees, Junho standing 2 feet away watching her face with complete attention. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. She hung up, looked at Junho. "I have to." "I know," he said. He was already turning back toward the car. Kwon. Kwon, who had been standing at a distance so professionally removed that he had practically achieved invisibility, was already moving. They drove to Emory in silence. Not the careful professional silence of their working hours, but something warmer and more complicated. The silence of 2 people who had been in the middle of something real when the world interrupted and are now sitting with the interrupted thing between them like an open book neither has closed. Junho did not check his phone, did not review documents, did not do any of the things he usually did in the car between locations. He just sat beside her and looked out the window and existed in the same space as her worry, without trying to fix it or minimize it or redirect it into something more manageable. She noticed. She always noticed. When the Genesis stopped outside Emory's main entrance, she reached for the door handle and he said, "I'll wait." She turned and looked at him. "You have 11 o'clock, she said. "Kwon will reschedule it." "It's the Hargrove Group meeting. You've been trying to get that meeting for—" "Kwon," Junho said. "We'll reschedule it." Kwon from the front seat said, "Already done." Nadia looked at Junho for a long moment. He looked back with the expression of a man who has made a decision and is not interested in debating it. She got out of the car. Dorothy's room was warm and smelled of the shea butter lotion Nadia brought every visit and whatever the hospital was serving for breakfast. Dorothy herself was sitting up straighter than Nadia had seen in weeks, grey locks pinned back, eyes sharp and bright and trained on the door, like she had been aiming them there since the phone call. "You look different," Dorothy said before Nadia had fully crossed the threshold. "Good morning to you too, Mama." "I'm serious."
You too, Mama.
Dorothy patted the edge of the bed.
Sit down.
"Sit down. You look like a woman who has been carrying something heavy and just got told she's allowed to put it down." Nadia sat. "I look like a woman who got a phone call at 7 in the morning and came straight here." "You look like that too," Dorothy agreed pleasantly. "Now, I asked you to come because something happened yesterday that I need to talk to you about face to face." She reached into the drawer of her bedside table and produced an envelope. Official. Emory University Hospital letterhead at the top. She held it out and Nadia took it and opened it and read it. Then read it again. Then looked up at her mother. "Mama!" "Read the bottom," Dorothy said. Nadia read the bottom. "Balance outstanding, 0. Paid in full. Anonymous donor. Processed 2 days ago." The room was very quiet. "How many people?" Dorothy said, with the measured precision of a woman who has been rehearsing this conversation since yesterday. "In your life right now have both the resources and the specific reason to do something like this." Nadia set the letter down slowly. "Mama?" "How many, Nadia?" A long pause. Outside the room, the hospital moved through its morning, distant footsteps, the soft percussion of medical equipment, someone laughing at the nurse's station down the corridor. "1?" Nadia said quietly. Dorothy nodded, like this was exactly the answer she expected and had already made her peace with. She folded her hands in her lap with the deliberateness of a woman settling in for the real conversation. "Tell me about him," she said. "Not the parts you think will worry me, the real parts." And so, Nadia told her. Everything. The beltline that morning. The coffee he had learned by watching. The Korean language course that arrived the morning she planned to surprise him. The food he would not accept and kept returning doubled. The schedule restructured around Dorothy's visiting hours without being asked. The way he said her name like it mattered which syllable carried the weight. The 4 words on the card she had been carrying in her pocket for 3 weeks that she still had not told anyone the meaning of. Dorothy listened without interrupting, her eyes never leaving her daughter's face. When Nadia finished the room, held the particular quality of silence that follows something true being said in full for the first time. Dorothy was quiet for a long moment, then, "Show me the card." Nadia hesitated, then reached into her pocket, put the card on the bed between them. Dorothy looked at the 4 Korean characters for a long time. She could not read them, but she looked at the handwriting, precise and deliberate and careful. And something in her expression went very soft. "A man who writes like that," she said quietly, "is a man who means what he puts on paper." "Mama, you know what he is, what his world is." "I know what you told me," Dorothy said. And then she looked up at her daughter with eyes that had seen 70 years of human beings making choices in difficult circumstances and had arrived at a very specific conclusion about which choices were worth making. "I also know that a man who moves his entire business schedule around his employee's mother's hospital visiting hours and then pays that mother's medical bills without being asked and without leaving his name, that man is not defined entirely by the world he operates in. It's complicated. Love always is," Dorothy said simply. "The uncomplicated kind isn't love. It's just convenience." Nadia looked at her mother. "I didn't say love." Dorothy looked back with an expression that had been perfecting itself for 28 years, specifically for moments like this one. "You didn't have to," she said. Nadia pressed her lips together, looked at the card on the bed between them. 4 words she had been carrying without translating, because translating them made them real, and real things required decisions. "He won't let me give anything back," she said softly. Every time I try, he redirects it. Gets there first, gives me something instead. She paused. I don't know what to do with that. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up the card, looked at the handwriting one more time, set it back down. Yes, you do, she said, but this time they meant something completely different. This time they were not about courage in a restaurant. They were about something harder and more necessary than courage. They were about trust. Nadia looked at her mother for a long time. Then her phone buzzed. A text from Kwon. She looked at the screen. Her expression shifted into something she could not entirely control. What? Dorothy said. Nadia turned the phone so her mother could see the screen. It was a photograph. No message. Just an image, taken from outside through the Genesis window, the angle suggesting Kwon had taken it without being particularly subtle about it. Junho sitting in the back seat of the car outside Emory University Hospital. Not on his phone, not reviewing documents, not doing any of the 100 productive things a man running a criminal organization should be doing with a rescheduled morning. Just sitting, looking up at the building, waiting. Dorothy looked at the photograph for a long time. Then she handed the phone back to Nadia and said with complete calm, "Bring him in." Nadia stared at her. "Mama, I want to meet the man who paid my hospital bill and is currently sitting outside in a car waiting for my daughter instead of running his empire." Dorothy straightened her locks with the authority of a woman who has made a decision and will not be revisited on it. "Bring him in, Nadia, and tell him to leave the bodyguard outside." She walked back out through the hospital entrance into the cold Georgia morning and found the Genesis exactly where she left it. She knocked on the window. It came down. Junho looked at her. Kwon looked at the steering wheel with the focused attention of a man who was absolutely not listening to anything. "My mother," Nadia said carefully, "would like to meet you." Something moved across Junho's face, not quite surprise, more like a man who has walked into thousands of dangerous rooms in his life and has never once been made nervous by any of them and has just discovered the precise configuration that changes that. "Your mother," he said. "Dorothy Ease, room 14B. Nadia held his gaze. "She knows about the bill. She figured it out herself." "I did not tell her." A pause. "Kwon stays here," she added. Kwon from the front seat said, "Understood," with the specific intonation of a man who was going to sit in this car and think about this moment for a very long time. Junho got out of the car. They walked through the hospital corridors side by side, past the reception desk, past the elevator bank, down the long corridor toward room 14B. And Nadia was aware with every step of the particular quality of his silence. This was not his usual silence. His usual silence was absolute and controlled and cost him nothing. This silence had a texture to it, something slightly less than his customary certainty. Seo Junho was nervous. She found this so unexpectedly, so completely humanizing that she had to press her lips together very firmly against something that wanted to be a smile. She pushed open the door of room 14B. Dorothy was exactly as Nadia had left her. Sitting up straight, locks pinned, hands folded in her lap. But she had also, in the 10 minutes Nadia had been gone, somehow acquired a quality of absolute regal composure that suggested she had spent those 10 minutes specifically preparing to be the most formidable thing Seo Junho had encountered all year. He stepped into the room. Dorothy looked at him. He looked at Dorothy. The room held a silence that had approximately 40 years of maternal wisdom on one side and a man who ran a criminal organization on the other, and somehow the outcome was never in any doubt. "Sit down," Dorothy said, pleasantly, in the tone of someone who is being pleasant as a choice rather than a default. Junho sat, in the chair beside the bed, the chair that was Nadia's chair, the one she sat in every visit. Nadia leaned against the wall near the door and watched the two most important conversations of her life prepare to happen simultaneously in a small hospital room that smelled of shea butter and morning. Dorothy looked at Junho for a long moment, He met her gaze steadily. Whatever nerves Nadia had detected in the corridor had been filed away behind that controlled composure of his. He sat with his hands relaxed on his knees and looked at Dorothy the way he looked at everything that mattered. Completely. "You paid my bill," Dorothy said. "Yes," he said. "Without being asked?" "Yes." "Without leaving your name?" "Yes," Dorothy nodded slowly. "Why?" A pause, and then Junho said something that Nadia had not expected. Not a deflection, not a practical explanation, not the kind of answer that kept things at a safe professional distance.
Because she sat with me,
he
on
said
a difficult
quietly.
evening when everyone
On
else
a difficult
left.
evening when everyone else left.
She didn't say
She
anything.
didn't fix
She just
anything.
stayed.
She didn't say anything. She just stayed. A pause. In my world, that is extraordinarily rare. I wanted to do something that was equally, without agenda. Dorothy looked at him for a long time. In my world, she said finally, we call that grace. Something in Junho's expression shifted, subtle and deep, like a word he had not heard applied to anything in his life for a very long time had just been said in his direction and had found something to land on. My daughter, Dorothy continued, is the most honest person I have ever known, and I have known her for 28 years. She held his gaze without blinking. She has been hurt by people she trusted with that honesty. Badly. In ways that cost her things she is still rebuilding. I know, Junho said, quietly, like he meant it in every direction. Do you? Dorothy said, not a question exactly, a measuring. Callum Rendell, he said, the fraud investigation, the license, 3 years of rebuilding in a city that knew her name for the wrong reasons. He paused. I know. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Then, what do you intend to do with her honesty, Mr. Seo? The room was very still. Nadia pushed off the wall slightly. Mama, I'm talking to him, Dorothy said without looking away from Junho. Junho looked at Dorothy with an expression so unguarded that Nadia felt her breath catch. This was not the face he showed boardrooms, not the face he showed dangerous men across negotiation tables. This was something she had only ever seen in fragments, in a quiet Korean restaurant over cold tea, on a beltline path in the grey morning, in the back of a Genesis moving through sweet Auburn while he talked about his father for the first and only time. I intend, he said slowly, to be worthy of it. Dorothy held his gaze for 5 full seconds. Then she nodded once, the specific nod of a woman who has received the answer she was looking for and is now prepared to act on it. Good, she said. And then, with the seamless gear shift that was purely Dorothy. Now, have you eaten breakfast? Junho blinked. Barely, but Nadia caught it. Nadia, Dorothy said, go to the cafeteria. Get this man something to eat. He looks like someone who skips meals. Mama, the cafeteria, Nadia. Nadia looked at her mother, looked at Junho, looked back at her mother whose expression communicated with complete serenity that she was going to have approximately 4 minutes alone with this man and that Nadia was not going to interfere with that. She went to the cafeteria. She took 6 minutes instead of 4 because she was not entirely sure she wanted to know what Dorothy said in her absence, and also because she needed those 6 minutes, standing in a hospital cafeteria line, to do something she had not given herself permission to do in 3 weeks and 4 days of careful professional distance. She let herself feel it. All of it. The beltline that morning. The coffee he had learned by watching. The schedule restructured around her mother's visiting hours. The bill paid anonymously. The way he had said, I intend to be worthy of it, in a voice that had no performance left in it at all. She let herself feel what she had been filing away since a magnolia tree on a cracked Atlanta sidewalk and 4 Korean words she still had not said out loud to anyone. She let herself feel it, and it was terrifying and warm and completely, stubbornly, inconveniently real. She went back to the room. Dorothy and Junho were sitting in what could only be described as companionable silence. Dorothy with her tablet, Junho with his hands relaxed on his knees, looking at nothing in particular with the expression of a man who has just survived something he did not expect to survive and is quietly grateful. Nadia set the food on the tray beside the bed. She looked at Junho. He looked at her. "She told me," he said quietly, "how you take your coffee." Nadia turned slowly to look at her mother. Dorothy was watching her Nollywood film with perfect innocence. "The volume on this thing," she said to no one, "is never quite right." "Mama, You told him." "He already knew," Dorothy said serenely. "I simply confirmed." She looked up at her daughter with warm, bright eyes that missed nothing and never had. "Stop trying to give back, Nadia. Stop trying to make it even, just," she paused, searching for the word, "receive, the way he does it. Quietly, without making it a transaction." Nadia stood in the middle of the hospital room between her mother and the man who had paid her mother's bills and learned her coffee order and restructured his empire around her schedule and written 4 words on a card she carried in her pocket every single day. She looked at Junho. He looked back, waiting. The way he always waited, completely without pressure, like he had all the time there was and intended to spend it exactly here. Something shifted in her. Not dramatically, not with any announcement, the way important things actually shift. Quietly, finally, like a door that has been deciding whether to open for a very long time and has just made up its mind. She crossed the room, sat down beside him in the chair Dorothy had clearly vacated specifically for this purpose because Dorothy Ease did not do anything accidentally. She did not say anything. She simply sat beside him, close, present, deliberate, and reached over and covered his hand with hers the way she had at Hanwoo, the night she told him to let her give freely. Except this time she was not saying anything with it, she was just staying. The way she had stayed on the difficult evening that started all of this. Junho looked down at her hand on his, then up at her face. And something in his expression, private and unguarded and completely unplanned, was the most honest thing she had seen on his face in 3 weeks and 4 days of collecting honest things about him. He turned his hand over beneath hers and held on. Dorothy, watching her Nollywood film, turned the volume up just slightly and smiled at the screen like it had just said something very satisfying. 3 days later, Kwon sent a text with just an address. No time, no instructions, no dress warmly today, or any other cryptic addition. Just a Doraville address that Nadia already knew by heart, and a single punctuation mark at the end that she had learned, in the specific language of Kwon's communicator, meant, this one is important. She knew the address. Hanwoo, the restaurant that did not exist on any map. She took the MARTA to Doraville and walked the last 6 blocks through the Korean district in the early evening, the street glowing warm with shop signs and the smell of sesame and grilled meat and something sweetly floral she had finally identified on her 3rd visit as the jasmine tea from the shop 2 doors down from Hanwoo's unmarked entrance. She knew this walk now, had learned it the way you learn the routes that matter, not consciously but through repetition, through the body deciding before the mind does that this is a path worth memorizing. She stopped outside the unmarked door, reached into her pocket. The card was there. It was always there, worn soft and warm and carrying 3 weeks and 4 days of being the most important thing she owned without technically being anything more than a piece of cream cardstock with 4 Korean characters on the back in precise, deliberate handwriting. She had been practicing every morning in her apartment with the Korean language course he had given her, the professional grade 1, the diplomatic translators course, the one that said teach yourself in 2 English words and meant something so much more complicated than that. She had been working through it with the same focused intensity she brought to everything that mattered to her. Early mornings, late nights, the MARTA, the hospital waiting room while Dorothy slept. She could say them now, the 4 words. In Korean. Imperfectly, probably. Her pronunciation still carrying the particular accent of a woman whose mouth had been shaped by 7 other languages before this one. But deliberately, clearly, with full understanding of every syllable. She was ready. She pushed open the door. The corridor smelled of barley tea and cedarwood exactly as it always did. She followed it to the room, pushed open the inner door, and stopped. Because the room was different tonight. Not dramatically, not in any way that announced itself, but different the way things are different when someone has paid attention to every small thing about a space and made quiet adjustments that together become something larger than their individual parts. The usual 3 paper lanterns had been joined by a dozen more, small, warm, hung at varying heights, so the room breathed with amber light from every direction. The single long table had been dressed more simply than usual. No documents, no portfolios, no professional materials of any kind. Just 2 cups of tea already poured, a small ceramic dish of the banchan she had learned to love over the weeks, and in the centre of the table a single stem of yellow freesia in a narrow vase. Yellow. Like the sunflowers outside the Sweet Auburn flower shop on the morning he took her to the parts of Atlanta that were true. She stood in the doorway and felt something move through her that she did not have a name for in any of her 7 languages. Something that lived below language entirely. Junho was standing when she entered. He always stood when she entered, every time, without exception. Like it was simply what one did. Tonight there was no Kwon. The room held just the 2 of them, and the lanterns and the tea and a freesia stem that was the colour of a morning 3 days ago on a belt-line path when everything had almost been said and the world had interrupted. "You came," he said. "You asked," she said. His mouth moved, the almost smile, closer than it had ever been to the real thing. "I ask many people many things." "I know," she said. "I'm not many people." This time he let the smile happen. Small and unhurried and completely genuine and so rare on his face that she felt the full weight of what it cost him to do it unguarded in front of another person. She crossed the room and sat down. He sat across from her. The lanterns breathed above them. The tea steamed gently between them. She reached into her pocket, put the card on the table between them. Face up. 4 Korean words in precise, deliberate handwriting, facing toward him so he could see them from his side of the table. He looked at the card, then at her. She wrapped both hands around her teacup the way she always did, felt the warmth of the ceramic against her palms. Looked at him across the small table with its freesia stem and its 2 cups, and everything it had taken both of them to arrive at this particular quiet room on this particular evening. "I've been practicing," she said. Something shifted in his expression. He understood immediately what she meant. She watched him understand it. The slight stillness, the quality of attention sharpening. The particular way his hands relaxed on the table as though he had been holding something carefully for a very long time and had just been told he could set it down. "Nadia, let me," she said, quietly. "You said you wanted it to be free, what is between us. You said you wanted it to be the one free thing." She held his gaze. "This is me giving freely, the same way you do, without agenda, without making it a transaction." A pause. "Just the truth, because that is what we do, you and I. We tell each other the truth." He was completely still. The room was completely still. Atlanta moved through its evening outside, 2 languages on every corner, the smell of something good cooking nearby, the city living all its lives at once completely unbothered. And inside Hanwol, everything held its breath. She looked down at the card, at the 4 characters in his handwriting, then back up at him, and said them, in Korean, imperfect and deliberate and shaped by 7 other languages and 3 weeks of early mornings and late nights and martyr rides and hospital waiting rooms and every quiet, determined hour she had spent learning how to reach toward him in the specific language he had used to reach toward her. Dangsinen ne jinsimyeo. The room did not move. Junho looked at her across the table with an expression that had no name in any language she knew. Not surprise. He had known she was learning, had known this moment was coming the way he always knew things, through attention and patience, and the particular intelligence of a man who watched everything carefully. Not relief exactly, Something older and quieter than relief. Something that had been waiting in him for a very long time, in a world that had never once given it anywhere to land. His eyes were very dark in the lantern light, and for the first time in all the weeks of collecting honest things about Seo Junho, the coffee, the schedule, the hospital bill, the freesia that was the colour of sweet auburn sunflowers, the Igbo words, the walks, the way he said her name. For the first time she saw something on his face that was not a fragment or a suggestion or a carefully rationed glimpse. She saw all of it, the full thing, unguarded and unheld and completely present. He reached across the table, slowly, with the deliberateness of a man who had never once done anything carelessly and was not about to start with this. His hand covering hers where it rested beside the card, his thumb tracing a slow circle on the back of her hand. "Your pronunciation," he said quietly, his voice different from every other version of his voice she had collected. Lower, stripped of everything except what it actually was. "Needs work," she laughed. That same genuine, unguarded laugh from their first evening in this room, the one that had startled out of her and rearranged the air and made him look away first because he didn't know what to do with it. Except tonight he did not look away. Tonight he watched her laugh with an expression of such open and undefended warmth that she felt it move through her like the first warm day after a very long winter. "I'll keep practicing," she said when she could speak again. "Yes," he said, "you will." A pause, the thumb still moving its slow circle. "Here, with me." She looked at him. He looked back. The lanterns breathed above them. The freesia stem caught the light. "Here," she said softly, "with you." And she turned her hand over beneath his and held on. The same way he had held on in a hospital room 3 days ago while Dorothy watched Nollywood and pretended not to notice. The same way honest people hold the things that are real, without letting go. The room settled into the most complete silence of the entire story. Not empty, not waiting, just full. Of everything that had been said and everything that had taken this long to say and everything that did not need to be said at all because it was already present in every cup of coffee and every restructured schedule and every freesia stem that was the colour of a morning when Atlanta opened itself up and showed two people something true. Outside, Doraville moved through its evening. 2 languages on every corner. The smell of jasmine tea from 2 doors down drifting through the cold Georgia air. Atlanta doing what it always did, holding every story within itself without comment, without judgment, without keeping score. Inside Han Wool, Nadia Ease and Seo Junho sat across from each other in the warm amber light with their hands joined over a worn cream card and 4 Korean words between them that had been waiting since the beginning to mean exactly what they meant. 1 line at a time. "Dangsinun nae jinsimieyo." You are my sincerity, meaning the truest thing in my life. And just like that, you have the translation. Go back to part 1. Go back to every cup of coffee that was always exactly right. Every schedule restructured without being asked. Every redirected gesture. Every walk that went slightly longer than necessary. Every time he said her name like it mattered which syllable carried the weight. It was always those 4 words, said in 100 different ways. He just needed her to learn the language first. If this story moved you, and I think it did, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment telling me the moment you felt it. Was it the coffee? The freesia? Dorothy meeting him in room 14B? Or was it those 4 words finally spoken out loud in an imperfect Korean accent, shaped by 7 other languages and 3 weeks of quiet, determined love? Subscribe if you haven't already. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that honesty is its own kind of romance. And thank you for staying until the end. This one was worth it. The end.